Ready or not, it's January. It's a new decade. It's a new year. It's January, a month that's named after a Roman god that nobody actually believes in anymore. The god Janus, a god nobody believes in anymore, and yet the mythology is immortal, right? We have actually named one of the months of our year after this Roman god. It's an indelible part of our culture and vocabulary now. Janus was known as the two-faced god. Now, what do you imagine might happen if you called someone two-faced today? Looking for trouble, right? Because that's kind of regarded as an insult. But when it comes to Janus, he is literally depicted as having two faces, just like we see up there on that coin. The god of beginnings, he's known as. One face looks forward to new beginnings. One face looks back. We got new beginnings looking forward, and then we also look back on all of the stuff that we're letting go of as we start a new year. And it presents a bit of a paradox, because you can't move forward if you cling to the past, and yet we have to remember the past if we're going to learn from our experiences and carry that learning and those lessons into the future. And then we add to the confusion by talking about the power of now, thanks to that little book by Eckhart Tolle. Forget about the past. Stop looking to the future. Just live in the now moment, right? Easy, right? I remember back when that book was popular, The Power of Now it was called. There are always some people who take things to extremes, if you know what I mean. I knew a person who was so taken with the idea of living in the now that they literally did nothing when they lost a job and ended up in foreclosure and bankruptcy and so on and so forth. That is a classic example of something that we call metaphysical malpractice, right? We take what is actually a good and sound idea and we apply it in the wrong way. We apply it in every situation with no discernment. That's what can happen when we take a good idea and turn it into a platitude, right? When we take something that has some depth and complexity and try to make it into a soundbite. The truth is that we need to be taking all three of those things into account: past, present, future. And if we become attached to one of those things at the expense of the other two, that's a recipe for trouble, right? We want to move forward, which means we anticipate change. We're open to learning new things and also to learning the lessons of history as we move forward. And in the process, we are inevitably going to be going through this now present moment. January, new beginnings, getting clear on our intentions for the year and letting things go. That was part of our burning bowl process that we did last week. Releasing the past and getting intentional, getting clear about what we want this year to look like. January is the month when I like to talk about new ideas. Not just any old new idea. That's interesting. Not just any new idea. It needs to be something that's compatible with our vision and mission here. Those are the things that guide us. A big part of my work here is trying to stay on top of all of the constantly changing and evolving ideas that come to us from this place where science and spirituality intersect. And also making sure that they support our mission and vision. So a few years ago, I found really what I think is a great resource from something called the Greater Good Science Center. It's at UC Berkeley. They publish an online magazine called Greater Good Magazine, which I have up here. It's on the web, an online magazine. And each year they put out a list of their favorite books for the past year. So this one is the list of I think they have like 5 or 6 of their favorite books of 2019. And the one that caught my eye, especially this time around, was this next one we have here. Let's see if we've got it up here. This one right here, The War for Kindness, Building Empathy in a Fractured World by Jamil Zaki. I think maybe the reason that this one jumped out at me like that is because of a movie that came out last November that I haven't had time to see yet. But I think it's a movie that's made a big impression on our collective consciousness, because apparently there's a new hero in town, or perhaps I should say a new hero in the neighborhood. His name is Mr. Rogers. The movie is A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. The movie we need right now. Amen, brothers and sisters. And his best known quote is really spot on as we're looking at this book. His best known quote is this one. He says, there are three ways to ultimate success. The first way is to be kind. The second way is to be kind. The third way is to be kind. I don't think I saw a single negative review of this movie. And when I read a few of the reviews that are out there, the consensus is that Mr. Rogers was able to connect at such a deep level with both children and adults because he had a secret weapon. He had a superpower, which is empathy. Empathy. Can you say that? I knew you could. And it wasn't just his on-screen persona that exuded this. They say it was also the way he was off-screen as well. That's what you see is what you get. So how about we start the new year with empathy and kindness as our focus of attention? And first I want to assure you, you don't have to run out and buy the book in order to be able to follow along with what we're going to be talking about for the next few weeks. I'm not here to sell books. I think it would be a worthy addition to any collection, but you don't need to get the book. Now, secondly, I hope I don't need to sell anyone on how this subject matter might go along with our mission and vision, right? How this subject matter might help us to learn how to thrive together in a changing world. A little bit of empathy and kindness might go a long way for helping us to co-create a world that works maybe a little bit better for everyone. You know, if we truly value unity within diversity, then a little more empathy and kindness will go a long way toward making that happen. Now, the author of this book, Jamil Zaki, is a professor of psychology at Stanford University. He's the director of the Stanford Social Neuroscience Lab. So he's using tools from psychology and neuroscience. And what they do at that lab is they examine how empathy works and how people can learn to empathize more effectively. He's written articles that have appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the New Yorker, the Atlantic, and so on. And I think this is his first book. But his peer-reviewed journal articles that he has either authored or co-authored fills up 6 pages on his CV when you look at it. So he's truly one of the experts in this field of research. And despite having all the hallmarks and qualifications of a bona fide academic geek, this is not a science textbook. It is approachable. His writing style is very conversational, and it's filled with personal reflections and stories and things like that that illustrate the things that he's talking about. So let's start our exploration of empathy and kindness by taking a deeper look at the title of the book, The War for Kindness, Building Empathy in a Fractured World. Now, I'm wondering if anyone else here had an allergic reaction to the word war. Karen had an allergic reaction. I had a slightly allergic reaction, but they were for different reasons. This is interesting. A lot of people hear the word war and they think of violence, right? I hear the word war and I think of an exercise in futility. Here's why. Here's why. The obvious way we use the word is to signify a violent confrontation, right? Killing people, blowing things up, that kind of thing. But we have a peculiar habit in this country of declaring war on all sorts of things. We had the war on poverty in the 1960s, and despite the good things it accomplished, poverty is still with us. We have the war on drugs in the 80s, right? This war on drugs, back then you could go to prison and do hard time for having an ounce of marijuana, and today it's legal in how many states? I mean, you talk about an exercise in futility. The war on terror in the last decade. Some people say there was a war on Christmas. Judging by the events of the past couple of months, I would say that Christmas won hands down, quite handily. But the point is that for different reasons we become very sensitized to hearing this word being used, and in the cases I just talked about, misused. But in the context of this book, the word war is spot on. Notice that the title is The War for Kindness, not War on Kindness. And when you read the book, you see that the author is talking about this ongoing struggle that humankind is engaged in. You know, there are all sorts of different forces that are at work that push us towards hatred and indifference. Human emotions are powerful. Greed and fear seem like elemental forces, and yet human history shows that we have always wanted and tried to push back against those tendencies in an effort to maybe get in touch with what Abraham Lincoln called the better angels of our nature, our common decency. I'd never thought of it that way before, but after reviewing the book, there is indeed a war of sorts going on within us. The war to push back against those tendencies that we come up against over and over and over again. And it reminds me really of an old theme that I used to see in cartoons, and you might recall this theme too. Cartoons when I was a kid, and even cartoons now that I'm an adult. This theme right here, there's our friend Homer Simpson. He's got a devil on one shoulder and an angel on the other shoulder, and they are whispering things in his ears, right? That's how that goes. So what one of the angels might be saying is something like this: be kind. The angel says, be kind. The other guy says, forget about that. Take what you want. There's this inner struggle, and we can legitimately call it a war that goes on as we struggle back and forth. Which one do we listen to? Which one do we obey? We get to choose the voice that we listen to, and this book wants to explore different ways that we can learn to make better choices. You know, in certain ways, our empathy levels are genetically determined, but there are also ways that we can turn empathy into a skill set, one that we can practice and expand. That's another thing that the book title says, Building Empathy. We can build empathy. And the last part of the title, about the fractured world, I don't think that's very controversial, despite the fact that it does sound a bit negative. A fractured world. Well, first of all, there's no doubt that certain aspects of our world, certain aspects of everyone's world, break or fracture from time to time. Relationships can fail. Health can fail. We can come up against business and career setbacks. Things like that that are common to the human condition. The author recounts the story of his parents' divorce when he was 8 years old. It was a pivotal event in his life. It was the event that started his journey toward making empathy the focus of his professional life. Now, I never went through anything like that as a child, but when I was practicing law, I knew many divorce lawyers, and one of the things that they thoroughly despised about doing that kind of work was having to deal with parents who would fight with each other through their children. And that was the experience that the author was having back when he was a child. Here's how he describes this experience. He says, "As they fought through me, I fought to hold on to both of them. Rather than picking a side, I tried to understand these two good people who were trying to do right by me despite the pain they were in. When I think back on those days, I'm filled with gratitude. That two people's experiences could differ so drastically, yet both be true and deep, is maybe the most important lesson I've ever learned." And that's what led him to do what he's doing today and what led him to write this book. A hard lesson learned as a child, and one that we all can benefit from today. But beyond those kind of personal examples, what are some of the other ways that our world might be fractured? Well, tribalism, political polarization, demonizing countries and cultures, and there are consequences. There are consequences. Psychologists have been working to measure empathy levels in people for a long, long time now. It's a scientific process. It's not quite exactly like a blood test and an x-ray where you get concrete, pretty much uncontroversial results. We need to take the results maybe with a little grain of salt, so to speak. But here are some of the findings of that testing. It says, for the past 4 decades, psychologists have measured empathy using questions like these, and he just recounted some of the ways that they measure it. Collecting data from tens of thousands of people. The news is not good. Empathy has dwindled steadily, especially in the 21st century. The average person in 2009 was less empathetic than 75% of the people in 1979. Okay, a fractured world indeed. And yet, a fracture or a crack doesn't always have to be regarded as a bad thing. I was reminded of a song written by the late, great Leonard Cohen called Anthem. And there's a line in that song in the chorus which goes like this: ring the bells that still can ring, forget your perfect offering, there's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. So we may not want to call it good or good news necessarily, but it is valuable information, this empathy deficit. It's valuable information because it's telling us where we need to focus our attention. It's telling us where we need to shine the light. And this book argues that the trend can be reversed provided that we're willing to make different choices by working to actively cultivate empathy and to make it into a valued norm once again. And we'll talk a little bit more about how we can do that next week. Come on back. Thank you.